Welcome back, Hebrew fans. We will be talking about the Hiphil and the Hophal today. If you're interested in what I'll be quizzing on and asking you to really be proficient in at the end of this week, it is the Hiphil. You don't have to really worry that much about the Hophal. Just know it exists. It's the passive form of the Hiphil. So if you see something that looks a bit like the Hiphil, but is a bit different, and the context requires it to be passive or reflexive, then you'll know that you're looking at a Hophal. But if you're going to focus on one thing from this chapter, that is chapter 20 of the Kutz and Josberger textbook, or one thing from this video lecture, or both, that is focus on the Hiphil, especially the perfect and imperfect and participle forms. Those are the ones that you'll come into contact with most often in the Bible and in your exegesis classes next semester. So we've got a lot of different things to talk about. I know this is a big, long list of things, but just know that we will talk about the Hiphil. We're going to talk about strong roots, right? We're going to talk about weak roots in future lessons, but here we'll talk about the strong roots and how they show up in the Hiphil perfect, in the Hiphil participle, and the Hiphil imperfect. And we'll talk about those other forms, the imperative and the infinitive, that are both built off of the imperfect and are very similar to each other. We'll end with a very short bit on the Hophal, this reflexive passive form of the Hiphil. Just to remind you, what we're looking at today in terms of the Hiphil is about 12.8, so about 13% of verbs in the Bible. This is one of the stems, kind of like call, like PL, like Niphal. So if you look at these together, the Niphal is a bit hard to see. It's in the yellow there. But so the call is about 70% of verbs. The Niphal is about 6% of verbs. The PL is about 10% of verbs. And the Hiphil is about 13% of verbs. The Hophal, which we'll also look at today, is less than 1% of verbs in the Bible. So if you're going to put your effort somewhere, put it towards thinking about the Hiphil. And thank goodness the Hiphil has some very distinctive markers that we can see. Here's our system of Hebrew verbal patterns or stems. Remember, our call means no additional meaning, no extra meaning, just the meaning of the root. We talked about the Niphal being the reflexive of the call, so passive or reflexive. And then the PL, remember, causes a state, or factative is the primary meaning. There's also this intensive meaning that can happen with the PL. The Pual is the passive of the PL. We talked about the Hiphil, which is a very strange, right? It's got a hit or a mit in the case of the participle added to the front of the verb. It's a very strange form. It's got a doubling of the middle radical, though, so it's a lot like the PL in that way, and it has something kind of a reflexive or passive, but sometimes intensive meaning to it. It is itself a very unique verbal form. But today we're going to look at another active stem, which adds a fairly uncomplicated meaning to the verb. That is the Hiphil, and we'll talk about the Hophal. These will end our discussions of the main Hebrew verbal patterns. We're going to have one more lesson on what are called rare roots, which you don't have to memorize and aren't going to be on the test, but it's just good to know they exist for your exegesis classes because you will run across them every once in a while. So you'll come across a couple of these in your exegesis class, but it is good to know that they exist. But this Hiphil exists quite a lot in the Bible, so this is an important thing to sink some time and energy into. So remember, we talked about uses of the PL, factative or intensive was a kind of a sub-meaning. There were some different ways to nuance these, but also just look it up. Some verbs just appear in the PL. And this is true also of the Hiphil, where we can say that the causative meaning, so this is different than causing a state. This causative means causing an action. So causing a state, remember, that was what we talked about with the factative use in the PL. So remember, PL, it was like turn someone, act like a priest or turn someone into a priest, or to make someone great, right? Here, it's causing an action. So like causing someone to hear, or causing someone to see, or causing someone to throw something, or causing someone to say something. It's going to become apparent quite early in our study here when we use some examples of what that means. But then again, there's also this second meaning of the Hiphil, which is just look it up. I mean, some verbs just occur in the Hiphil. Some verbs have special meaning in the Hiphil that isn't related to being causative exactly. Again, this is fairly rare. I mean, there's there are a bunch of verbs that just show up in the Hiphil, but most verbs in the Hiphil take this causative meaning, causing an action. So let's see here. What might causative mean with some examples? Well, if we use the root achal, which means to eat, the call means to eat. Remember, there's no special meaning there. And then the Hiphil would be to cause to eat or to feed. Like if I feed my children, right? I would use the Hiphil to describe that whereas in English I would say I feed my children. That's a causative really form, or that's a causative way of thinking about the verb to eat. I am feeding my children. So in Hebrew that would be the verb eating, but then in this particular Hiphil stem or pattern. So the verb mot, which means to die. In the call it means to die. No extra meaning there, but in the Hiphil it would mean to cause to die or to kill. Another example here, ra'ah, which in the call means to see. In the Hiphil this would mean to cause to see, which is a way in Hebrew to say to show someone something. I will show you. There's a land that go to the land to which I will show you, God says, right? So you can say this in the Hiphil in Hebrew, a Hiphil version of, or Hiphil use of the verb ra'ah, to see. So in any event, you'll see a lot more examples of what the Hiphil does in just a minute, but here, take a look at some of these affirmatives of the perfect. You can see this. This is the perfect chart that we've looked at every single time so far in class. Zipatatati utemtenu. Zipatatati utemtenu. And those are exactly the same endings we get, or suffirmatives that we get with the Hiphil. Notice I've used, for the paradigmatic root here, gadal, right? So here's our paradigm for the Hiphil perfect. Notice gadal is our root. You see a gimel, a dalet, and a lamed there. I used this also with the PL. Remember in the PL it was like make great. Here it's cause to be great. A slight difference. It's not as different as you might imagine, but there are a lot of other verbs where this is a stark difference here. But note the form here, right? That's not a doubling of the middle radical. That's just because the consonant before it ends with a silent schwa. Notice that there's that silent schwa underneath the gimel, our first letter of our root. So our second letter of our root just begins, and it's got a dalet. It's a dalet. It's got a dagesh in it because it's beginning after a silent schwa that ends a syllable. So it's going to be a stop. So that's not part of our root. But notice what else are part of our pattern here. What else do we see as part of this pattern? So you just take a hard look. You see your root. You see your zipatatati utemtenu endings, our perfect endings. We also have a hi at the beginning, right? Well, that makes sense because it's Hiphil, right? Hiphil is supposed to help you to sound out what this root pattern actually looks like. So the Hiphil perfect, it sounds like Hiphil or higdil for the third masculine singular form of gadal that you see here. Notice there's one other thing added to this, and that is in the third person forms, not second person or first person forms, but third person forms, we have not only that hi beginning, the hey and hirek beginning, but then we also have a hirek yod that is infixed between the second and third radicals. Do you see that? So characteristic markers of the Hiphil, we have our hi prefix for the Hiphil perfect, and then we also have, in our third person form, a hirek yod infixed between the second and third radicals. Now, this is a marker of the Hiphil. If you see a hirek yod infixed in the middle of your root with a verb, you know you're looking at some form of the Hiphil, and it's a third person marker here for the perfect. So why is it called the Hiphil? Remember our paradigmatic root from medieval Hebrew, which is pa'al. We don't use this anymore. Now we use katal, meaning that word that means it's one way to say to kill, katal, right? But why do we use katal? Because pa'al was a weak root. It had a guttural for the middle letter, so it really messed up patterns, especially the PL. So in any event, now we use this, we can say hiktil form or something. You can use other ways to say this, but that medieval way of naming the root using the paradigmatic root of pa'al here is Hiphil. Notice you have your hi beginning, and then you have your infixed hirek and yod in between your second and third radicals. So a hi prefix and an infixed hirek yod, that is a form of the Hiphil. All right, just taking a look here. There's a little game we're going to play. Play with me. Feel free. If you were in class, I would just have people shout out the answers here or write them down or something. But here, you're just going to have to kind of shout at your TV screen or your computer screen, your phone, however you're engaging this lecture. But take a look at these. You can even pause this and take a moment and just try to see, can you find Hiphils? And in fact, you can do this for PLs and calls as well. Just try to think about these different verbs. But first, look for those markers, the particular markers of the Hiphil. Do you see any here? I see a few, right? Take a look, for example, at number 1. That has a T ending, like zipatata T. It's a perfect verb, and it starts with a hi. So that's a Hiphil, perfect. Do you notice number 2? Hivdil, you have 3 good root letters there, a bait, a dalet, and a lamed. And then you have this infixed hirek yod, and you have a hi beginning. That's conspicuous there. That's a Hiphil, perfect third masculine singular. Well, look at the bottom there, number 5, bottom in the left-hand column. Hik talt. The zipatat T, this is our second feminine singular perfect ending, and we have a hi stuck onto the front, so we are looking at a Hiphil perfect second feminine singular. You can also see in number 8, this starts with a hi and has a tem ending, zipatata T utem. Tenu. And then if you look at number 10, we have a hi, we have an infixed hirek yod, and we have an oo ending, zipatatati oo temtemnu. So that would also be a Hiphil perfect third common plural. There are our Hiphils. Can you see them? Can you see our markers there? Our hi beginning and our perfect endings. Those are Hiphil perfects there. Notice our hi, and for at least 2, number 2 and number 10, for 2 of these examples, we have our infixed hirek yod because they're third person forms of the Hiphil perfect. You can also look through and just see what other forms do we have here, right? Number 3, we have an eem ending. That's a noun ending, and we start with a mame, and a schwa underneath it. So this is a participle because it's got a noun ending, but it's a PL participle because it has a schwa underneath the main prefix, and it has a doubling of the middle radical. That pei in the middle there has our distinctive dagesh, showing that it's a PL participle. It's masculine plural because it has the eem ending, the masculine plural ending. How many PLs can you find? I just spotted you one, right? Can you see any others? Take a look at number 6. Remember, our call perfects have lots of A-class vowels. This one starts dibarta. See that dib? It has a hirek underneath the first radical, but it has a ta ending, a perfect ending. It doesn't have any stuff added to the beginning of it like a Hiphil. So it's not a call, and it's not a Hiphil. It's got a doubled middle radical. That's a PL perfect. Another way to know this is that davar, that word that means word, if you make that into a verb, it occurs in the PL. It just shows up in the PL. That's where it just means to say, to speak. And it just always shows up in the PL. So it doesn't mean cause to speak or anything like that. This is just one of those verbs that just occurs in the PL. All right, do you see any other PLs? Well, those are our 2. And then, of course, those are our distinctive PL markers in green there. Participle marker, our perfect markers. And how many calls can you find? Well, you can probably guess the rest because look at number 4. I know it's got a schwa underneath the first radical. You got a strong root there. You have a tem ending. You don't have an I-class vowel underneath your first radical, which would tell you it's a PL. You don't have a hi stuck under the beginning. You don't have an extra noon or something, which would be a nifal. So you have a nice call perfect right there. And then number 7, you have lots of A-class vowels in your new ending, zipatatatiu temten nu. That's our last perfect ending, our first common plural ending. That's going to be the chata, this verb that means to sin, really. And so chatanu means we sinned. Call, perfect. And then number 9, shomrim. We have an eem ending. That's our noun ending, but it's stuck onto a verb, so that's a participle. And then we have an O, a holum over our first radical. That's a sign, remember, of the call active participle, our holum over our first radical. Those are our 3 calls. All right, so that's a little adventure there just to kind of remind us of some of the distinctive features of some of these forms and help us remember them. So remember those call active participles. Just like I said, that long O, that holum over our first radical. And then our distinctive endings, our noun endings, eam and oat for the masculine plural and feminine plural. We have our distinctive feminine singular participle ending et, our et ending. I'm saying et because there's 2 segals before it. So shomeret. Notice those 2 segals and then a tav at the end, et. Our et ending is our feminine singular call active participle ending. So this is our form, right? Remember PL participles. We had a maim that was added to the front and then a schwa underneath that. We'll get a load of this. We're going to keep that maim for the Hiphil. Here's our form of the Hiphil participle. We're using the same root there, gadal. Notice that, gadal. Now do you see what's stuck on the front there? Still, we kept our maim, but instead of a schwa underneath, we have a patach, right? Our A-class vowel, our short A-class vowel. Do you see any other characteristic markers? Do you see that hirek yod, that infixed hirek yod between our second and our third radicals of our root kadal? Those occur in all of the forms except the feminine singular, the et form, right? But we still have that distinctive ma prefix. So if you see a maim and a patak, ma, stuck onto a verb that you know, a root that you know, especially if you see an infixed hirek yod, you're looking at a Hiphil participle. Yeah? Let's do that one more time. Boom. Ma prefix and the infixed hirek yod. Those are our Hiphil participles, right? Take a look at that A-class vowel underneath your performative. Do you remember that also was the symbol, that was the recognizable sign, that was the clue for the PL imperfect? Remember we had our performative, and then we had our schwa underneath it, and that shows us that it's a PL imperfect. Well, guess what? Same thing. This is awesome. Our Hiphil imperfect, just like our nifal imperfect, we kind of lose our performative when we add the yod to the front. It kind of squishes our hey or our nun if we're talking about the nifal. Right? We lose that, but we still have these distinctive vowels that help us to see what was there. So our participle ma, our Hiphil imperfect form begins with a ya. So yagdil. That's our Hiphil imperfect third masculine singular form, yagdil. And we'll see that A-class vowel underneath our performatives. So you see this? Remember, our PL had a maim and then a schwa. That was our distinctive PL participle form. That was our prefix. And then for the imperfect, for the PL imperfect, we also had a schwa underneath our performative, our prefix that we added for the imperfect. Take a look at the Hiphil there. We have a ma, and then that A-class vowel is also underneath our performative. So if you see A-class vowels underneath your performative for a strong root, you're looking at a Hiphil. If you have a schwa underneath your performative for a strong root, you're looking at a PL. That's one way to tell them apart. So Hiphil imperfect of a strong root, here's your paradigm. So we're using katal here as our paradigmatic root. So yaktil up there at the top left, notice our infixed hirek yod. And notice that you have the infixed hirek yod on most forms here. You don't have it for the third feminine plural and second feminine plural forms, but you have that infixed hirek yod in the other forms, which is the distinctive Hiphil trait. So notice that infixed hirek yod, and you have that distinctive patak under the performative. Remember, a schwa under the performative shows you the peel. A hirek under the performative would show us a call or a nifal if we have the whole triangle there. And the patak under the performative shows us the Hiphil. So yaktil, taktil, taktil, taktili, aktil, yaktilu. Right? Yeah, so this is that ya sound ta, and in the first common plural, naktil. That A-class vowel sound, along with that E that hirek yod, that long I sound in the middle of your word, that is going to be distinctive of the Hiphil. This is our Hiphil in perfect form. So that's our Hiphil. Don't worry, don't fret for a moment here. We'll have lots of ways. We'll have lots of examples of the Hiphil. But I'm going to show you the Hophal here for a moment. This is something of it's not inconsequential. I don't want to say that, but it is not as of as much consequence as the Hiphil is in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. So you just need to know that you're going to every once in a while run into one of these strange roots here, and it's going to take a little while to figure out what it is. But if you just remember that Hophal is the passive or reflexive of the Hiphil, was caused to, or something like that. And it sounds like what it is. It starts with a ho. So ho, that's our Hophal, that's our passive reflexive of our Hiphil. So for example, Hiphil, here on the left there, you can see himlich, that's our verb malak, which means to be king, to reign, right? Melech means king, the noun. So malak, the verb, means to reign or to be king. So himlich, notice our root there, mem lamed kaf. Notice our infixed hirek yod, and notice our hi prefix. So it's a Hiphil. It's a Hiphil perfect because you see the hi there, right? It's not ye, it's hi. We have our Hiphil perfect prefix, and we don't have any ending. It's a zip ending. So zipatatati, right? That's our third masculine singular ending. So this is a Hiphil perfect third masculine singular. And notice that I've translated it here as he caused to be king, right? It's causing an action. So being king is the action. He caused to be king. Someone, excuse me, like Samuel. Like Samuel makes Saul king. He caused him to be king. So the Hiphil could be used in that way after anointing him. So he caused to be king, and then you would afterwards have an object. You'd have, he caused to be king him. He caused him to be king. So if the name Saul comes after this, he caused to be king Saul. He caused Saul to be king. That's how we translate that. You can see underneath that, higid, he told. This is from the verb nagad. I'm sorry, this is a weak root, but it occurs a whole lot in the Bible. This is a very, very common root, nagad. It's a weak root. It has a first noon, which means when you stick something onto the front, that noon disappears. So this form occurs a lot. He told. Anyone who tells anyone anything in the Bible, someone like a messenger or some sort of person who's working for someone else who reports anything, they use this verb here, nagad, and they use it in the Hiphil. It just means to tell someone something in the Hiphil. It doesn't really occur in the call or in the PL. It just means to tell someone in the Hiphil. So higid happens all the time, and it always means he told. So higid, here you can see that infixed hirek yod in there. You have a hi prefix. You only have two strong letters left because the noon, it got pushed into the gimel. It's the dagesh is in the gimel because that's actually representing the noon. We'll get to this when we talk about weak roots, so don't worry about it yet. But just know that this form higid shows up all the time in the Bible. We have another weak root underneath, hikah. This is from naka. That's another noon, first noon that got smushed, turned into the dagesh and inside the kaf. Don't worry about that part right now, but just know that this verb also just occurs. It means to strike someone, or smite is actually how it's often translated. So if you've ever heard someone reading from the King James and they talk about God smiting people all the time, this is that exact verb right here, naka. It's used surprisingly sometimes to talk about healing as well, but that's always supposed to be a shocking thing to see that verb, and then healing often is covered up in translation. But in any event, so the Hophal, you can see the Hophal forms of all three of these verbs on the right-hand side of your screen there. The Hophal is that reflexive or passive. And look, it's homlach, and I'm sorry, that looks like a long A class vowel, right? It looks to us like a comments, but look, it's followed by a schwa. This is that comments chatuf, that like secret O, short O vowel. But look, homlach, he was made king. So if it was in the Hiphil, you'd expect it to have that infixed hirek yod, and you'd expect it to have a hi prefix. But here it has a ho prefix. It's the Hophal. And so he was made king. So for this verb, the subject is the person who is made king. In the Hiphil, it's the person doing the action, right? Causing the other person to become king, who's the subject of the verb. So you'd be like on the left-hand side of the screen, you'd say, Samuel caused to be king, and then Saul, right? On the right-hand side, he was made king. In that form, you'd say, Saul honlach. Saul was made king by Samuel. So two different ways to say the same thing, right? Using the Hiphil or the Hophal, the active or the passive. So for that second one, he told or he was told, right? The messenger tells. So the messenger, higid le David, to David, right? So malach, the messenger, higid, told le David, to David, or if you want to say it the other way around, in Hophal, David, hugad, was told. That's our passive. Remember, we can have those u vowels, those shureks, and here a kibbutz. Those u vowels stuck into your verb, those are signifying that it's a passive. So hugad instead of higid. Higid, he told. Hugad, he was told. David, hugad, David was told. Malach, by a messenger. Okay, so then underneath that last example, hika, he struck. So this is usually used of God. God strikes the Egyptians or something like that. But then huka, Pharaoh, huka, was struck, was stricken. La Adonai, by God, right? La Elohim. So these are two different ways to talk about causative actions. The one that was caused to do something, or the one that did the causing. But in any event, so the Hiphil is an active verb, the Hophal is a passive verb. Just try to remember that as you translate these. But remember, the Hophal is also very rare. That does not occur very much at all. Both of them have a hey prefix. The Hiphil has a hi prefix. The Hophal has a ho or hu prefix. Those o and u vowels there. That u vowel especially functions as a mark of the passive whenever it occurs in verbs, inside verbs. So, you might be asking yourself, how can I keep all these things straight? Well, I've got a little chart here, a handy-dandy chart, some tips for identifying the stems of imperfect verbs. So, perfect verbs are a little bit easier to notice, actually. So if you have a strong root and you have a noon stuck onto the front of your perfect verb, if you have a zipatatatu temtenu ending, and you have a noon stuck on there, you're looking at a Niphal perfect, right? If you have a hi stuck on, you're looking at a Hiphil perfect. If you have a double middle radical and an I-class vowel under your first radical, you have a PL there. And if you got lots of A-class vowels, you're looking at a call. Like, those are easy ways to differentiate the perfect. The imperfect is a little bit trickier because you have those same preformatives, right, that occur for all the different forms, those yods in the third person. I'm going to use third person masculine singular here just because it's got the least amount of stuff going on as our paradigm here, but you could redo this chart for all the different forms using like a noon for our first common plural as a prefix, or using our tav for our third feminine singular and plural, or our second person forms, and so on. You'd find the same vowels underneath there. So our call is distinctive because it has a y, it has a hirek underneath our performative, and then usually it has a, like yiktol, usually it has an O-class vowel over the second radical, but it's got some other forms of the verb there, vowel there. But usually it's got a schwa underneath the first radical. So yik or yim or yik, yit, something like that. So here we go. We have our yod and our hirek underneath it, signifying the call. There's one other form where a hirek will occur underneath our yod, and that's our Niphal form, where we have our performative like a yod, and then you have your hirek underneath that, and then you have a dagesh and a kametz. If you got those three elements, you're looking at the full Niphal triangle. Remember, it's a triangle because it's like you start at the hirek, you go up to the dagesh, go down to the kametz, go back over to the initial hirek there, and then you've got your triangle. So there's our Niphal triangle, which can be confused with the call unless you keep looking, right? So like call is like yiktol, the Niphal would be yikatel, something like that. So what if you look at a verb and you can tell it's an imperfect verb because you have a yod prefix. You can tell you got a 3-letter root and you've got a schwa underneath there. You're looking at the PL. Your schwa underneath your performative. The doubling of the middle radical is also another good sign. The short A-class vowel under your first radical letter is actually a sign of the PL, but you don't have to know that. The thing to hang your hat on here is the schwa underneath the performative and the double middle radical. You're looking at a PL when you're looking at a PL imperfect when you see these things. We just learned the Hiphil, right? That is a short A-class vowel underneath our performative. Now, we are talking about strong roots here. Weak roots can mess these patterns up like crazy, and we're going to get to those things in the last week of class. But if you know your strong roots, that's what matters. And then with the weak roots, you just see, I got a bunch of gutturals in my root. It's going to be messed up. But if you know your strong root patterns, that really helps. So this yod performative here, and we got our 3-letter root, and then we have underneath our yod our short A-class vowel. Our patak, that's a sign of the Hiphil imperfect. We would also want to see an infixed hirek yod there, right, between our second and third radical. Then we have these other forms, these passive forms that I showed you, right? The Hiphil, yit. We have a doubling middle radical and a yit at the beginning. Remember that one? So we got way too many letters. You're looking at a Hiphil. The pual has got that oo vowel underneath the first radical. But again, very rare root. Don't worry about that for now. Don't worry about memorizing it. Don't worry about testing it. Just worry about the fact, do you know that this thing exists? It's an option. So that when you look at the dictionary or something for what a particular form is, you can say, oh gosh, yeah, I remember that thing exists. And then in the bottom right, there's those two different forms, yo and yu, of the Hophal. Again, very rare root. Don't worry about the Hophal. Don't let this intimidate you. The things to learn on this list are right here. Actually learn these forms, right? Try to be able to distinguish them in practice. And these, if you can memorize these forms, that'd be great. But just know that they exist, that these are options, and basically what they can do, and that is going to put you in really great footing for walking into your exegesis class in the spring. So one other thing to know is that all of these different stems that we've been learning about, they can show up in the Vayik tol, or the preterite, or the Vav consecutive. Remember that storytelling mode? All of them can show up in those forms. And all of these verbs can show up as the PL, Vayik tol, or preterite, or Vav consecutive, or they can show up in the Nifal and these, right? So all these different forms that I've been showing you for the imperfect, those are also very helpful for recognizing the Vayik tol. One interesting thing about the Hiphil is that when it's in the Jussive, remember Jussive is like let him go, it's like a third person command. When you have something like this root shamad, which means to destroy, you have it in the imperfect yashmid in the Hiphil imperfect here, which would be like he will cause to destroy. So yashmid here. You can see your A-class vowel underneath your performative and your infixed hirek yod in your root. Those are your markers of your Hiphil imperfects. In the Jussive, something interesting happens. So if you like let him destroy, you actually don't have that infixed hirek yod. You have like a compensated kind of longer I-class vowel, this tsere there, the long I-E-class vowel underneath your second radical there. You still have the ya beginning. Now, you don't have to know this. You don't have to memorize this, right? I'm telling you this so that you have a vague memory that this exists somewhere in the background. But I'm also telling you just because the Hiphil will show up in the Vayik tol, the preterite. It'll show up quite a bit in other stems too. The PL will show up, and if you want to tell a story and you want to say, and someone said something, you might use the verb davar, which the noun means word. Davar as a verb means to say. It always occurs in the PL. That can show up in the Vayik tol or the preterite or the call vowel, and then he said, and then he said. So you might be seeing these PL forms of the Vayik tol. And here I'm showing you that it can show up in the Hiphil as well. So Vayash made. Now, remember, Vayik tol is like kind of based on the call form, that vaya. Well, here this would be a preterite, or you could call it a Vayik tol, or you could call it a Vav consecutive, right? So a Vav consecutive storytelling mode of a Hiphil verb would be vaya. Notice we still have our dagish, our doubling of our performative, so vayi, right? We still have that vayi. It's past tense, simple past tense storytelling mode. So this would be, and he caused to destroy. So we can show you some weak roots here too. Again, you don't have to memorize these weak roots. You don't have to know them. Just this verb nagad, it shows up a whole lot. But look, when we add a prefix here, it crushes the noon. The noon disappears, turns into a dagesh actually, and jumps into the next letter, the gimel. So yagid, which occurs a lot. And, this verb nagad, whenever it shows up in the Hiphil. And whenever it shows up in the Hiphil imperfect or in the vayik tol, in that storytelling mode, it'll show up without its noon. So yagid. And yagid means he will declare, or he will say, he will report. The jussive, let him report. Notice it doesn't have our infix tirek yod. It has a longer IE class vowel, or longer tsere. And in the vayik tol, it'd be vayaged. So if you see this, vayaged, you might not know what it is. That's okay. But you look at your vowel underneath your performative, and you're like, that's a patak. So this is probably a Hiphil of something. And then you say, is there a Hiphil verb I know that has just a gimel and a dalet that show up together? Ah, yes, nagad. To say, declare, report, tell, something. So, and he told, or and he reported. That's what this is. So here's another first noon verb, nuach, which means like to rest or be comforted. We all want that right now. And yaniach, here is how we would say this. Notice our infix tirek yod. We have a sneaky patak here because we have a third guttural. You don't have to worry about that. Or remember, but just know that this is going to mess with your stuff. We'll get a bit more later to how things. How to predict these patterns of gutturals messing you up, or middle weeks messing you up, or noons messing you up. This verb is actually triple weak, so you can turn your brain off here or fast forward a little bit if this is confusing at all. But I'm going to put a couple more forms up here, like third haze, which mess up your infix tirek yod. So every once in a while, you're not going to have that infix tirek yod, but notice you have your good A class vowel underneath your performative here, which is helping you see that it's a Hiphil verb. So rava, to be many, in the Hiphil would be to cause to be many. So God causes to be many, Abram's descendants or something like that. So the jussive form of that is really weird. The vayik tol is really weird. You're not going to memorize this. You're not going to have to know this. But just know sometimes you're going to have to kind of look up forms. You're going to have to go to your dictionary, your BDB, and you're going to say, I see a resh and a bait together, and it's a verb. It's a vayi verb, so it's a vayik tol of something. I got a resh and a bait. I'm going to guess rabah, which means to be many or much. So you look up rabah, and then it'll show you this is what the vayik tol form is for a Hiphil. There was no way that you'd be able to predict this. So don't worry about memorizing these things. Just know that there are some predictable patterns of things that'll mess things up. So like gutturals and like third haze. So that resh there at the beginning, that really messes people up, and it's I can explain why and how this works, but you don't need to know that. But also just know that first gutturals here, got an I in there at the beginning. That's going to mess some things up. You're going to lose your hey when you put it in the jussive or in the vayik tol. Don't worry about why or how this happens. Just know it's okay. You still have your A-class vowel under your performative, so that's going to help you find it. But these weak roots, I'm going to give you the tools to figure out the weak roots on the last week of class. Until then, you're going to still see them in your grammar and in your reading, your translation work, but they're going to still give you those roots, right? What we want to do is get you to the point by the end of the semester where you can get by without those, right? Maybe not to know everything and read everything perfectly the first time, but you'll have the tools to be able to not need every verse to have the weak roots spelled out for you, to have the full roots spelled out for you, but you'll be able to kind of guess what they are. So here's another one, this first yods. These get so weird, and don't worry about that at all. So in any event, so remember imperatives. We're going to talk a little bit about imperatives and infinitives here. Remember imperatives, they're all linked. Remember imperatives and infinitives as forms are connected. Now for an imperative form, remember what we do. We put the verb in the imperfect second person. If it's a call you want to do this with. So here's our call of katal. If you want to give an imperative or a command, you put that verb into the second person imperfect form. And remember then you take off the performative. So tiktol is you will kill. If I wanted to say kill, then I would put it in that form and then I would take off the performative, so it would just be katol. Katol. Go. All right, so if I wanted to do this in the PL, cause to kill or something. Maybe that's that's actually the Hiphil, the cause an action, cause a state. Cause to be dead would be kind of this one. It's a very strange thing. This verb wouldn't really show up in the PL, but just as an example, because it's our paradigmatic root, katal, just to show you what it would look like. If you want to put this in the PL, remember we put our performative on there, and we have our schwa, right? And we have a double middle radical. That's our nice PL pattern there. And then we take off the performative, and then we have katel. That's our PL imperative, katel. For the Hiphil, we actually have this ha. This is unusual, unexpected. Ha! No one expects the Hiphil imperative. It has a ha beginning. I actually like to say that when I come across these ha verbs. I say ha! No one expects the Hiphil imperative and infinitive because they begin with this strange ha form. So look here, our masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, feminine plural, all of them begin with this ha prefix. We have an infixed hirek yod for the feminine singular, masculine plural forms, which are strange. Strange in that the feminine singular form is the one in the participle that doesn't have it, but whatever. We're going to roll with the punches here this deep in the Hebrew semester, right? But if you just notice your prefix, your ha prefix is for Hiphil imperatives and infinitives. So haktel, haktilu, haktili, haktelna. If you care, if you want to know, I'm showing you the whole thing. When you actually see the performative for the imperfect with a class vowel underneath the performative, what you're really seeing is a tav or a yod, etc., a prefix, an imperfect prefix that has kind of gobbled up a ha, a hey with a patak underneath it. So when you remove the performative, what's the ha kind of comes back. Again, one of these ghost beginnings that ends up coming back. You don't need to know that; it's not important. But that's just to explain what that means at the bottom there. This kind of older form turns into the taktelna, the Hiphil imperfect form, and then you remove the beginning, and that ha jumps back out, and it still exists. So there's our final step there. You remove the tav performative, and that ha jumps right back. That old ha comes back. Okay, so our Hiphil imperative, right? So our root shamad. Tashmid is our imperfect. So you will cause to kill. Sorry, this is shamad, different root. This is in katal. Shamad means to destroy. Another verb of destruction, sorry. But tashmid here would be you will cause to destroy, and then the imperative cause to destroy would be hashmade. Now notice you can just know the ha beginning there as long as you know it's not a definite article, right? Hey patak dagish, there's no dagish here. But if you see a root that you know and you got a ha stuck onto the front of it, that is a sign of the Hiphil imperative and then also infinitive construct, because remember they're built off the exact same pattern. So here's our Hiphil infinitive, still built off that same pattern. Notice our root on the left there. Our strong root's going to be on top. I'm just giving you some examples of some weird weak roots underneath. Focus on that top row only. Shamad, our imperative hashmade, cause to destroy. Our infinitive absolute. To the right of that, hashmade, exactly the same pattern. It would be like to cause to destroy, or causing to destroy. And our infinitive construct actually has that hirek yod in the middle there, which is a strange thing. But so our infinitive absolute, infinitive construct actually have two slightly different forms. But you're not going to have to remember that. It won't even matter if you remember that ha is the prefix for a Hiphil infinitive or a Hiphil imperative, right? Ha prefix. Hiphil imperative or Hiphil infinitive. And from that point on, you can figure out whether this needs to be a command or it needs to be an infinitive. It depends on the sentence that you're translating. I know that's too fast. It's too much. Take heart. You are stronger than Hebrew. You can do this. You can get to the end of the semester. I know that God will equip you with what you need for the time being. If you need more practice with Hiphil verbs, I'm trying to make these videos manageable, but know that in the chapter where we talk about the Hiphil, there is some help there in translation, but also if you need more help, you can ask your preceptor, you can ask me for more resources. I don't want to clutter you up with too many resources at this point, but if you need them, please reach out. And on the Friday office hours, we can spend some time working through some examples of Hiphil verbs. So, see you then.